On February 6, 2026, a Supreme Court in Kampala did what few courts in Africa have ever dared to do. It exposed, with forensic precision, that a sitting president's landslide election victory was a lie. Not a contested result, not a disputed margin, a complete fabrication. Digital evidence, extracted from Uganda's national election servers, revealed that Yoweri Museveni's reported 71% win was pre-programmed into the system before a single vote was counted. The data showed something even more explosive: that opposition leader Bobi Wine was ahead in the authentic tallies before the manipulation took hold. In one courtroom ruling, 39 years of autocratic myth collapsed, and the world was watching. This is not a story about democracy delayed. This is about democracy denied, then proven, then weaponized. What happened in Uganda that day sent shockwaves not just through Kampala, but through Washington, London, Brussels, and every capital where the cost of enabling strongmen is quietly being recalculated. The server data didn't just challenge Museveni's legitimacy, it obliterated it. And for the first time in nearly 4 decades, the man who built his rule on military dominance and fear stood exposed by the one thing he couldn't suppress: digital evidence. But this is also a story about what happens when truth wins in court and power refuses to leave. Because within hours of the ruling, Uganda streets began filling not with celebration, but with soldiers. The regime that lost in the courtroom was preparing to fight back the way it always has: with force. Yoweri Museveni is not a man who stumbled into power. He is a revolutionary who seized it. In 1986, after 5 years of guerrilla warfare, he marched into Kampala at the head of the National Resistance Army and declared a new era for Uganda. He promised democracy. He promised accountability. He promised an end to the violence that had torn the country apart under Idi Amin and Milton Obote. For a brief moment, he was Africa's new hope, a liberation hero who spoke the language of reform while consolidating absolute control. What followed was not a transition to democracy. It was the construction of a system designed to look democratic while functioning as a monarchy. Museveni allowed elections, but only after ensuring that the military, intelligence services, courts, and election commission all answered him. He allowed opposition parties, but deployed security forces to break up their rallies, arrest their leaders, and intimidate their supporters. He allowed a free press until journalists started asking the wrong questions. Over time, the veneer of legitimacy became thinner, but the tools of control became sharper. By the 2021 election, Museveni had been in power for 35 years. His opponent was a 39-year-old musician turned politician named Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, known to millions as Bobi Wine. Where Museveni represented the old guard, military discipline, and entrenched power, Bobi Wine represented youth, defiance, and a generation that had never known another president. His rallies drew massive crowds. His message was simple: it's time for change. And the regime's response was brutal. Campaign events were violently dispersed. Bobi Wine was arrested multiple times. Supporters were beaten, detained, disappeared. On election day, the internet was shut down. Independent observers were blocked. And when the results were announced, Museveni had won with over 58% of the vote. Bobi Wine rejected the results. So did much of the country. But without hard evidence, the dispute became another chapter in the familiar script of African elections. The opposition cries foul, the international community expresses concern, and the incumbent stays in power. Until now, the 2026 election was supposed to be different. Museveni, now 81 years old, was running again. Bobi Wine, undeterred by years of harassment and violence, was running again. But this time, the opposition had learned. They knew that winning votes wouldn't be enough. They needed to prove that those votes had been stolen. So they prepared. They embedded technical observers. They documented anomalies in real time. And when the official results came in showing Museveni with 71% of the vote, a margin so overwhelming it defied every credible pre-election poll, they didn't just protest. They went to court, and they brought receipts. The Supreme Court case that followed was not a formality. It was a battlefield. Bobi Wine's legal team presented server logs, metadata, and forensic analysis from independent cybersecurity experts. They showed that the national tallying system had been accessed and altered. They showed that results were preloaded into the servers before polls even opened. They showed time stamps that didn't match, vote totals that didn't add up, digital fingerprints of interference at the highest level. And then they presented the most damning piece of evidence. The authentic data, buried beneath layers of manipulation, showed Bobi Wine ahead. For weeks, the courtroom became the center of Ugandan political life. State media tried to ignore it. Pro-regime commentators dismissed it as foreign interference. But the evidence kept mounting. And on February 6, 2026, the Supreme Court issued its ruling. The election was not credible. The declared results were not accurate. The digital forensic evidence was conclusive. Museveni's 71% landslide was a fabrication. In most countries, this would be the end of the regime. In Uganda, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Within hours of the ruling, Ugandan social media lit up with reports of military convoys moving through Kampala. Soldiers were deployed to key intersections. Armored vehicles appeared outside opposition offices. The state-run broadcaster barely mentioned the court ruling, instead airing footage of Museveni meeting with military commanders. The message was unmistakable. The law may have spoken, but the guns had not. This is the paradox at the heart of Uganda's crisis. Bobi Wine won in court. The evidence is undeniable. The international community has acknowledged it. But Museveni controls the military, the police, the intelligence apparatus, and the resources of the state. He has spent 4 decades building a system where legal legitimacy is secondary to physical control. And he has shown again and again that he will use violence to maintain power. But something has changed. The server data didn't just prove fraud. It destroyed the regime's narrative. For years, Museveni has justified his grip on power by claiming popular support. He has positioned himself as the father of the nation, the stabilizer, the leader who won because Ugandans trusted him. That story is now in ruins. The numbers were fake. The mandate was manufactured. And everyone knows it. This is where the international dimension becomes critical. Because Uganda is not an isolated dictatorship. It is a key partner in Western counter-terrorism operations. Ugandan troops form the backbone of the African Union mission in Somalia, fighting al-Shabaab with American training and equipment. Uganda is a major recipient of U.S. military aid. It is a strategic ally in a region where stability is scarce and extremism is rising. For years, Western governments have quietly tolerated Museveni's authoritarian tendencies because he delivered security cooperation. But the server evidence has made that bargain politically untenable. On the same day as the Supreme Court ruling, the U.S. Senate issued a public statement. It was not diplomatic boilerplate. It was a condemnation. The statement called the election illegitimate. It demanded accountability. It signaled in carefully calibrated language that there would be consequences. This was not just moral posturing. It was a signal that the calculus in Washington had shifted. Supporting a leader exposed as a fraud, even a strategically useful one, carries costs that are no longer worth paying. The European Union followed with its own statement. The African Union, long criticized for its silence on electoral fraud, issued a rare call for dialogue and respect for constitutional processes. The United Nations expressed concern. One by one, the pillars of international legitimacy that Museveni had managed to maintain began to crack. But rhetoric is not regime change. Statements are not sanctions. And Museveni has weathered international pressure before. The question is whether this time is different. Whether the combination of forensic proof, domestic mobilization, and international scrutiny creates a dynamic that even a militarized autocracy cannot ignore. The strategic stakes extend far beyond Uganda. If Museveni falls, it sets a precedent. It shows that digital forensics can be used to hold authoritarian regimes accountable in ways that traditional election observation cannot. It shows that courts, even in repressive systems, can still matter if the evidence is strong enough. It shows that a generation raised on social media and technology can outmaneuver old guard strongmen who think power comes only from guns. But if Museveni survives through repression or delay or international indifference, the message is equally clear. Evidence doesn't matter. Courts don't matter. The only thing that matters is control. And across a continent where aging autocrats are clinging to power in the face of youthful opposition, that message will resonate. Bobi Wine understands this. He has been beaten, jailed, and threatened. His family has been harassed. His supporters have been killed. But he has not backed down. And now, with a Supreme Court ruling in hand, he has something no Ugandan opposition leader has ever had: undeniable proof that he won. The question is what he does with it. Does he call for mass protests, risking a violent crackdown? Does he pursue international legal avenues, hoping that external pressure will force Museveni out? Does he negotiate, accepting a power-sharing deal that legitimizes a stolen election in exchange for a role in government? Each option carries risks. Mass protests could lead to bloodshed on a scale Uganda has not seen in decades. International legal strategies could take years and yield nothing. Negotiation could fracture his base and allow Museveni to claim victory. But doing nothing is not an option. The Ugandan people did not go to court for a moral victory. They went to reclaim their country. And they're not alone. Across Uganda, there is a generation that has never accepted Museveni's rule as legitimate. They were born into his system, but they were raised on the internet. They have seen the Arab Spring. They have seen protests in Sudan force out a dictator. They have seen Kenya's youth movement challenge entrenched political elites. They know that change is possible. And they know that the server data has given them something previous generations never had: proof. But they also know that proof without power is just data. And power in Uganda still flows from the barrel of a gun. This is where the military becomes the decisive factor. Museveni is not just a president. He is a former guerrilla commander who still sees the armed forces as his personal instrument. He has spent decades stacking the officer corps with loyalists, rewarding them with land, money, and impunity. But the military is not a monolith. There are younger officers who were not part of the Bush War. There are soldiers who see the writing on the wall. There are commanders who understand that backing a discredited leader could isolate Uganda internationally and cut off the foreign aid and training that sustains their capabilities. If the military fractures, Museveni is finished. If it holds, he survives. And right now, no one knows which way it will go. The regional dimension adds another layer of complexity. Uganda sits at a geopolitical crossroads. To the north, South Sudan remains a fragile state where Ugandan influence is critical. To the east, Kenya is watching closely, knowing that instability in Uganda could spill across the border. To the west, the Democratic Republic of Congo is a theater of proxy conflicts where Ugandan forces have operated for decades. To the south, Rwanda, led by another long-ruling strongman, Paul Kagame, has a complicated relationship with Museveni, sometimes allied, sometimes adversarial. If Uganda descends into chaos, the entire region feels it. This is why international actors are not just watching, they are calculating. The United States wants stability, but it also wants to be seen supporting democracy. The United Kingdom has historical ties to Uganda and significant diaspora pressure to act. China, which has invested heavily in Ugandan infrastructure, prefers order over ideology and will likely stay neutral as long as its interests are protected. Russia, always opportunistic, could offer Museveni support if it sees an opening to expand influence in East Africa. But none of these external players can decide Uganda's fate. That will be determined in Kampala, in the barracks, in the streets, and in the corridors of power, where aging elites are realizing that the old rules may no longer apply. The server data has done something irreversible. It has turned a political dispute into a legal fact. Museveni's victory was not just contested, it was fabricated. That truth cannot be spun away. It cannot be buried. It cannot be ignored. And it has fundamentally changed the nature of the crisis. For 39 years, Museveni has maintained power through a combination of patronage, intimidation, and the myth of popular legitimacy. The patronage networks are still intact. The security apparatus is still loyal. But the myth is gone. And without it, the foundation of his rule is exposed as what it has always been: force. This is the moment where rhetoric meets reality, where international statements must translate into action, where opposition movements must decide whether they are willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom, where militaries must choose between loyalty to a leader and loyalty to a nation. Uganda is not the first country to face this choice, but it may be the first where the evidence is so clear, so digital, so undeniable that the international community cannot look away. The server logs are not opinion. They are not interpretation. They are fact. And that makes this crisis different. What happens next will depend on a series of calculations. Does Museveni believe he can weather the storm, using force to suppress dissent until the world moves on to the next crisis? Does the military believe its interests are better served by backing him or abandoning him? Does the international community believe that imposing costs on the regime is worth the potential blowback on counterterrorism cooperation? Does Bobi Wine believe that mobilizing the streets is worth the lives that will inevitably be lost? There are no easy answers, but there is a timeline, because once a Supreme Court invalidates an election, the legal and political clock starts ticking. Museveni cannot simply ignore the ruling and carry on. He must either comply, which means stepping down, or defy it, which means openly rejecting the rule of law. Either path leads to escalation. If he complies, it would be unprecedented. No African liberation-era leader has ever voluntarily left power after being exposed in this way. If he defies the court, he confirms what his critics have always said, that his rule is based not on law, but on coercion. And that opens the door to a legitimacy crisis that even a loyal military may struggle to contain. The international response will be calibrated. Sanctions take time. Diplomatic isolation takes coordination. But the direction is set. The U.S. Senate statement was not an accident. It was a message. And if the regime responds with mass violence, the message will become a mandate. Aid will be frozen. Visas will be revoked. Assets will be targeted. The network of loyalists who have profited from Museveni's rule will suddenly find their wealth inaccessible and their futures uncertain. This is the pressure that autocrats fear most. Not moral condemnation, but material consequences. And the server data has given the international community the justification it needs to act. But pressure from outside is not enough. Change in Uganda will come from Ugandans, and they are already moving. Social media is alive with calls for action. Civil society groups are mobilizing. The diaspora is organizing. The legal victory has unleashed a wave of energy that years of repression had suppressed. People are no longer asking whether Museveni rigged the election. They know he did. The question now is whether they will accept it. This is where the stakes become existential. Because if the Ugandan people, armed with proof, backed by international support, and led by a movement that has endured years of violence, cannot dislodge a discredited dictator, then the message to every other autocrat on the continent is clear. Hold the guns, ignore the courts, and you can rule forever. But if they succeed, the precedent is transformative. It means that digital evidence can be a tool of liberation. It means that courts can still check executive power. It means that a generation raised on technology and transparency can outmaneuver the old guard. And it means that the age of unchallenged strongmen in Africa may finally be ending. February 6, 2026 is not the end of Uganda's crisis. It is the beginning of its resolution. The server data has crushed the myth of Museveni's mandate. The Supreme Court has spoken. The international community has responded. The streets are waiting. And the military is calculating. What comes next will determine not just who leads Uganda, but what kind of country it will be. A nation governed by law and accountable to its people, or a garrison state held together by force and fear. The evidence has been presented. The verdict is in. Now comes the reckoning.